So, and I quote, "It is not Christianity that profits from the victory of the concern for victims in our world. The most powerful anti-Christian movement is the one that takes over and radicalizes the concern for victims in order to paganize it. The powers and principalities want to be revolutionary now, and they reproach Christianity for not defending victims with enough ardor. In Christian history, they see nothing but persecutions, acts of oppression, inquisitions." End of quote of Rene Girard in I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, page 180. That's a shortened quote. For this video, I'm going to start with a summary review of some of the concepts I believe I've explained and in previous videos, but I'll just review them in order to have them fresh on mind. At the point of starting this video, I do not know how exactly I'm going to end it, because it might feel by the time I get to that point that I'm too agitated, that I'm running out of words, or that it's just better to do a separate application kind of a video or application to the denomination. So here's some review. First, systems thinking. Human organizations, such as congregations and denominations, are more like organisms than machines. They consist of complex, layered, and interwoven systems of various kinds of relationship that make it difficult to trace where an issue in the community is sourced. Often, in fact, it is actually the whole community that creates the challenge, and communities don't like confronting themselves as a whole. Second, anxiety in the system. When anxiety, especially chronic, sustained anxiety, enters the interwoven group system, such as with a pandemic or such, then if the system is not healthy, not inoculated enough to redirect that energy, or to ground it is another way of putting it, all elements in the system remain agitated and get more agitated. Anxiety in the system. Third is imitative desire causing rivalries, which Rene Girard calls mimetic desire. We are creatures that imitate and co-desire what we see others desiring. It's one of the main principles that has advertising working. This is part of our nature, part of who we are. I think, myself, that it is part of what the Bible refers to as the flesh. This imitative desire creates rivalries and anxieties, tensions, unless we know another way of being, a way of not desiring what everyone else seems to want. Not desiring what everyone else seems to want is part of what I believe Jesus taught and demonstrated as the alternative way, the way he called the way of the kingdom of God. And then the next concept that I've touched on already is anxiety in the system triggering the scapegoat mechanism. When anxiety amplifies in a system of such creatures, gets bigger, gets stronger, their unspoken collective consciousness, it's almost like an instinct, seeks relief by quickly identifying a cause, some kind of plausible, on the surface at least, explanation for who or what caused the problem. Rarely do any of them have the health to stop and reflect on how they are contributing to the issue. That does not come easily. Like Eve and Adam, and all of us since then, the reflexive way of the flesh is to blame shift, to point away from ourselves. And so a convenient blamed one is found, the scapegoat. The community then lays all of the blame on that person or that subgroup, and they are sacrificed in some way by demembering, I didn't want to use dismembering, sending away, shunning, excluding, and various things like that, all the way to indirect and direct killing, character assassination, and assassination by the group. Those are the things I wanted to review before I moved further into Girard's thought and some of my own. So a scapegoat victim is chosen somewhat arbitrarily. That victim is a person who is not really responsible for the anxiety in the system, not really responsible for the problem, although all scapegoats in history, of course, bear some guilt, except for one. And via collective self-deception and murder, real or figurative, the human organism believes it has found relief from what it thinks ails it. I think I see this a lot in political activity, because voting someone out of office can be a version of this. And so when the society starts laying blame on a particular politician, then one way they feel like they can take action in that is to vote the person out, vote them off the island. As Rene Girard says, the devil loves this process. Satan is behind it. It is the way of principalities and powers. If these powers can keep people and groups from being reflective and thoughtful about this dynamic, then society will keep sacrificing mostly innocent victims. Religious systems are not immune from this behavior, and may in fact be especially susceptible to it if they take certain angles of religious views, particularly legalistic or community rule-oriented views. Until something changes within that religious system and in the world, chaos, disorder, and unrest will remain where the Creator intended order and peace to reign. Now, into that world of the flesh and its ways, which had even at that time infiltrated the religious system of the day, after much groundwork was laid by God to show and tell people there is a different way. Here's how you take part in it. And after the lesson never really in a sustained way taking hold, into that world comes Jesus. And he becomes the first truly innocent victim of the scapegoat mechanism, which the principalities and powers have used to put blame shifting into motion when it becomes abundantly clear that Jesus is a threat to the religious system of the day. And so in the biggest turn, the biggest flip, the biggest redirection of history, the trap that Satan sets is sprung back on the principalities and powers, pulling back the curtain on their machinations, while simultaneously opening the curtain of the Holy of Holies, so a new small s spirit and a new large s spirit can take hold on followers of the way of Jesus, to wake them up, to make them aware, to help them to see what they had not seen before. Now, you want more on this, you can read Girard yourself for more detail. One of the books I would recommend is this one, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, that I quote from in this video. But that's all I feel is appropriate to share right now. And quite frankly, some of it I don't understand myself yet. But I'm assuming that you, whoever becomes my audience, see the relevance of what I just pointed out. The arrival of Jesus and the releasing of this mechanism, this showing this mechanism to be deceitful and false and not right. When I get to this point, at least this, when I was practicing this, then I want to break out into a sermon, a sermonic mode, and I don't really want these videos to be that so much. I want them to be educational and conversational in a more of a sense. So here's a paragraph taken from Wikipedia that describes Girard's view about scapegoating. Scapegoating serves as a psychological relief for a group of people. Girard contends that this is what happens in the narrative of Jesus of Nazareth, the central figure in Christianity. The difference between the scapegoating of Jesus and others, Girard believes, is that in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, he is shown to be an innocent victim. Humanity is thus made aware of its violent tendencies, and the cycle is broken. I would write it as, and the cycle has a chance of being broken. Or, like I said, the curtain has been pulled back. Whether that changes anything or not is the question. Final line out of Wikipedia. Thus, Girard's work is significant as a reconstruction of the Christus Victor atonement theory. End of quote. So here's some of what that means, having looked behind the curtain, having become aware of this dangerous cycle of scapegoating. The resurrection and clean slate offering that Jesus brought to us leaves us no reason to ever blame shift, like even Adam did, like we all do, pointing away from ourselves, refusing to take a look at how we contribute to the issue in the community. Because of what Jesus did and because of what he exposed, we can take responsibility for us missing the mark in our lives, for us not living up to what God hopes for and expects of us. It's called confession. And when we engage in that awareness and that naming and that confession, we find ourselves in closer, more intimate relationship with the Godhead than ever before. It is possible, because this has been written about, to be part of a Christian religious system and never feel that. Because you need to engage what Jesus has revealed. So now we're getting closer to the quote that started me writing this whole sub-series, which has now almost been in the works for 2 weeks, and I'm kind of eager to be done with it. I'm also eager, if people have questions or want to hear more about certain aspects of it, then I'm willing to explore some of it more or explain some of it more. But we're not quite to the full quote yet. I first now have to explain how, in more recent Western society, Girard says it's since Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, this monumental change that Jesus brought has shaped the cultural landscape and has also consequentially warped it. I need to be brief and I hope you can follow. If you're acquainted with Paul Vanderklay's videos, there are various places where he talks about this. So in what's referred to as this little corner of the internet, people will be familiar with some of what I am going to very briefly say. If you know of historian Tom Holland's book, Dominion, and the story that goes with it, its creation, you will know of a then secular historian, or what we call secular, who in attempting to write a history covering from Roman times to today, kept being drawn back to the account of the crucifixion, and came to recognize in his preparations its major contribution to Western culture. So in the end, he starts his historic account with the crucifixion account. He had not planned on that when he began researching the book. And he is one now, as far as I know, as no longer secular, and I do believe he's participating in some version in the life of Christianity, I'll say. He calls on us all to be very aware that Western society is built on the foundation of values that come directly and uniquely from Christianity. I'm going to mention another name here, that's Charles Taylor, that a lot of other people have pointed to as saying similar things, although I really didn't dig deep into all of that, and I still haven't read his important book yet, because philosophy doesn't really excite me that much. So I leave philosophy to other people. But his book called A Secular Age touches on some of this. And although I think this quote isn't quite on target, I'll just read this piece out of Wikipedia to give you a sense of where he lays some groundworks. Taylor looks at the change in Western society from a condition in which it was almost impossible at one point to not believe in God, to one in which believing in God is simply one option of many. He argues against the view that secularity in society is caused by the rise of science and reason. He argues that this view is far too simplistic and does not explain why people would abandon their faith. He says in the Middle Ages, most people could not even imagine a viewpoint without God. The culture has changed so that multiple viewpoints are now conceivable to most people. And so in A Secular Age, he talks about also the Christian roots of Western society. What others have said is clear from reading him is what I have pointed to before. Western society is built on the foundation of values that come directly and uniquely from Christianity. And here's where I'm going to run off into some of my own thoughts. This is a major area of thinking and exploring for me right now that I think does loop back to what's going on at the denominational level. So, but do be aware that, you know, I can't give quotes for what's coming next. Even though our larger culture is considered secular or non-religious, which from a Reformed perspective is a mistake. We believe all of life is religion. So there's nothing that you do that is value-driven that does not have a religious implication. So, but the claim is that it's a secular society. Even though it is that, most of the core values in our Western culture, the ones originally sourced out of Christianity, remain. And these are values like fairness, justice, concern for the downtrodden, concern or care for the victim, honesty, integrity, certain kinds of moral behaviors, and so on. These remain a part of our culture. But these are held to while cut off from their foundation, from their purpose. which is found in the crucifixion. So the crucifixion or the gospel message has been lost, and these values have remained in the culture. And that's important to be aware of, because they still sound Christian. But we need to start thinking, are they really? Are they really traceable back to the mandate of the gospel, the mandate of Jesus? So what is happening lately is that some of these values are getting elevated apart from the whole way of Jesus worldview, kingdom of God worldview. I would argue that I'm not really sure Christianity institutionalized ever really understood that, because to my thinking, as soon as you institutionalize Christianity, you're beginning to lose the kingdom. That's part of the point. Oh well, I hadn't planned to say that. I'll start over with this sentence. So what is happening lately is that some of these values are getting elevated apart from the whole way of Jesus worldview, and the Christian institutions, denominations, and that generated those in the first place. I need to add a sort of a caveat, because when you enter into this kind of landmine social territory, you have to do a lot of caveating in order for the best chance to be heard. So I'm not saying these values do not exist in other religions. I'm just saying Christianity is the main source of them in Western culture. So I want to look now at just one of these residual values for the rest of this posting, and that is concern for victims. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to state the proposition I came to without a whole lot of more background and explanation. I have tested it on various people, and I have learned that it's very hard to understand and take in, because it's a kind of a countercultural question to raise. At least for most people, the first time they hear it. If I get a chance to talk about it a little bit more, they begin to understand. And this is exactly why I've done several videos as background to this point, setting it up. This is the theory, the proposition. I am no expert on history, but we are the first culture I know of in history in which claiming some kind of victim status has become an empowering act. I'll repeat it and then I'll add something. We are the first culture I know of in history in which claiming some kind of victim status has become an empowering act. And I'll add a few clarifiers in a second, but I'll add this to the statement as I'm speaking. You also can't argue with it. Anything said that sounds like a diminishing of the victimization that the person is claiming is verboten, is not doesn't work in the culture that we're in. My clarifiers are, I am not intending in any way, I'm actually aching for people who might have heard it that way, to deride or dismiss actual victimhood, okay? Real trauma. I'm not deriding or dismissing that at all. I'm actually not even speaking of it. I am more talking about situations in which people experience perceived victimhood and then escalate the situation. I also am very reluctant to give examples at this point. So it's just the idea. I'm a storyteller, and I prefer to give 2 or 3 examples. Yesterday, visiting friends, I just heard another one. And there's been various news stories that are like that I think are examples of this in the past couple of years. The second clarifier is, I am simply wondering out loud about our society's emphasis on respecting victim status. I'm raising the question. I am struggling with the question. I'm not just raising it. I am struggling with the question. I began wondering about this is the third clarifier, when I began to see patterns in news reports where victimhood and victim status was the focus. And in fact, it seemed that there was an attempt for the victim to claim multiple victim labels, as many as possible, in the news story. That first got me thinking, something's off here. What's going on in our society? I think I will tell that story in brief outline. This was a story that was in the news of a person who was presenting as female, so was, I believe, transitioning. I may have some details wrong, but you'll get the sweep of the story. Who booked an appointment at an aesthetics salon run by an ethnic person, I believe, and who part of the booking was to receive a bikini wax, but they still had their male genitalia. And so the female proprietor of the place said, we can't do that. And it was, I believe, partly even a religious violation for her herself to be doing that for a person with male genitalia. And so this became a news story because of the lawsuits that came out of it. And the person that had booked the appointment then claimed discrimination, and it went from there. That's one of the key stories that got me starting to wonder about what is going on here. All right, so with a new religious expression in the world, that of the way of Jesus, who was the one truly heroic, truly innocent, true victim that showed how the principalities and powers can be defanged and declawed, the long existing understanding of caring for the victim, for the oppressed, began to change since that time, and that change has accelerated in the last 100 years or so. And now we find ourselves in a place where the tables have been turned on classic Christianity, where a core value it brought into Western civilization, that of concern for the victim, now gets thrown back at Christianity, and it is depicted publicly and derided, Christianity is, as the main, biggest victimizer in history. And if anything related to Christianity victimizes someone today, it's a big story. And again, some of that is legitimately a big story. But it's come to a uniquely new proportion. Another core value of Christianity, namely that one can find value in suffering, one can find wisdom in suffering, in struggle, seems to, as this victim respect has risen, seems to have been completely forgotten. And we act as if all struggle needs to be prevented or eliminated. You know, helicopter parenting and all those kinds of terms. Parents that bulldoze the way for their children to never have any adversity. That's been lost. And though none of us would necessarily choose adversity, those of us who have been through it and survived, healed, processed the suffering, see that it had benefit. I'm making these videos because I think, and this one particularly, because these are concerns I think we need to be talking and thinking about as a denomination particularly, and as a reflection on the dynamics of the denomination, particularly as revealed at Synod 2023. So here's how Rene Girard says it in a longer quote. And this quote is from page 180 on I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. I'll read it slowly because it is, to me anyway, hard to follow. He says, "It is not Christianity that profits from the victory of concern for victims in our world. It is rather what I think must be called the other totalitarianism, the most cunning and malicious of the two, the one with the greatest future by all evidence. At present, it does not oppose Judeo-Christian aspiration, but claims them as its own, and questions the concern for the victim on the part of Christians." And he adds in brackets, "not without a certain semblance of reason at the level of concrete action, given the known deficiencies of historical Christianity." So this new, what he refers to as building totalitarianism, rightly critiques Christianity to a certain level, and yet it poses as Christianity, in maybe not in a conscious way, but it looks like or seems like Christianity. That's what I hear him saying. Back to the quote. "The other totalitarianism does not openly oppose Christianity, but outflanks it on its left wing." And then the next paragraph. "All through the 20th century, the most powerful mimetic force was never Nazism," right? How people got caught up in Nazism, "and related ideologies. All those that openly opposed the concern for victims," because Nazism was definitely that. In fact, earlier in the chapter, he says that Nietzsche paved the way in his writings about Christianity for Nazism to embrace having complete disregard for any kind of victimization. But that's earlier in the chapter. "The most powerful mimetic force was never Nazism and related ideologies. All those that openly opposed the concern for victims and that readily acknowledged its Judeo-Christian origin. They knew where it came from. The most powerful anti-Christian movement is the one that takes over and radicalizes the concern for victims in order to paganize it. The powers and principalities want to be revolutionary now, and they reproach Christianity for not defending victims with enough ardor. In Christian history, they see nothing but persecutions, acts of oppression, inquisitions." End of quote. There's a lot in there. I'm not sure I agree with it all, but it is something we need to be talking about. And I recognize at this moment that I need to wrap this series with another video that basically, it's going to be mostly questions, I think, or mostly points to ponder, at least as it shapes in my mind so far. But I'm going to stop this one here. Clearly, I need to make another 4th video in the sub-series, and I'll try and apply this to our denominational and synodical situation. I hope.